She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. Monthly Review has a piece entitled The Rising Star of Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso's Spirit of Sankara. The question for this program is, who was Thomas Sankara? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is the piece I referenced was originally published in Nkrumah's Africa, and the title, The Rising Star of Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso's Spirit of Sankara. The new, bold, and vibrant leader of Burkina Faso has left his continental colleagues in the dust when representing Pan-African leadership. Well, who was Thomas Sankara? My guest is the president and co-founder of the Thomas Sankara Center for African Liberation and Unity, a Pan-African library and political education center based in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, where she lives. She's joining us from Niger. She is also working to open a second Thomas Sankara Center in Niger, and I believe that center is now open. She's a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party and a journalist with Africa Stream. Inem Richardson, welcome.
Greetings, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited, and I'm happy to see such a widespread interest in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, and of course our ancestor, Captain Thomas Sankara. So this is a very exciting occasion for me.
Before we get to our lead story, there was a front page story in the Washington Post today that I just have to mention this. Trump shut out refugees, but is making white South Africans an exception. Federal and Virginia state officials are preparing to receive about 60 white South Africans at Dulles International Airport next week, months after the Trump administration ground U.S. refugee admissions to a halt. The program meant for people fleeing war on political persecution has restarted, but only for one group, white South Africans. The arriving families, who are part of a group that Donald Trump says has faced racial discrimination, will be resettled outside of Virginia in at least 7 states. I saw that, and it would be, well, it's just insane. I don't know if you have any comment on that, but I saw that, and I said, well, before we start our discussion about Thomas Sankara and Burkina Faso, I just had to let the audience know that the insanity continues. Inem, any thoughts or comments?
No, it's crazy. It's been really interesting to see the relationship between the Trump administration, largely pushed and encouraged by Elon Musk, who, as you know, is a white South African, or comes from that settler background, and then the current South African government. Because right now the South African government is in a coalition with the DA, which is a white majority party, and so there's a lot of collaboration happening in South Africa. So I would argue South Africa is not doing enough for the indigenous African population, at the same time that the Trump administration is, claiming that, white South Africans are targeted, this and that. And so it's like, it's so backwards from what's actually going on, where the majority of the population doesn't have access to land. There's all these issues for the indigenous population. And then, we're supposed to believe that the settler population that has the vast majority of the land and resources is oppressed. And it's just wild to see. And, Elon Musk is, definitely somebody who represents that colonial minority. So, his voice is overrepresented right now.
In fact, you mentioned Elon Musk, but you also have Peter Thiel, who's a South African that is advising him. In fact, it's Peter Thiel who has backed JD Vance and has put the money behind JD Vance to get him to the political level that he has in the White House. So there are I think about 4 South Africans of note. The other 2 names I'm forgetting, but one of them is both of them. His grandson is another one. So there are a number of South Africans that are very close to the president, and so this really demonstrates what the 1%, when you've got the millions, you can get your voice heard and you can get action taken. Mel W, thank you for that super sticker. What are some good books to learn about this topic? Well, we'll get to that in just a second, because the Thomas Sankara Center is a library. So so my guest will be able. So Mel, stay with me and we'll get that answered. So my first question, Inem, to you: how does a college student from San Jose, California, decide to start the Thomas Sankara Center for African Liberation and Unity, a think tank, a open library and political education center in the Sisson neighborhood of Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso?
It's a good question. It's kind of a long story. I mean, I have to clarify, I didn't start the Thomas Sankara Center alone. One of the comrades who started it with me, Wenlasida Sempore, is, from Burkina Faso, born and raised there. I, as a student, studied abroad in Senegal when I was a, college student in the U.S. And this was around 2018. There was a massive movement that was emerging in the Sahel region of Africa at the time, against the French-controlled currency called the CFA franc. And I met people from all over West and Central Africa that were resisting French neocolonialism and, Western imperialism in general. And it really contributed to my politicization, to my understanding of Pan-Africanism. And so I got involved and, I met with these local organizers, some of them, like, as I mentioned, from Burkina Faso, and I became very interested in the history of Thomas Sankara. So it was with these comrades who came from Burkina that we started to think about, what's a project that we could put in place that would be useful. At the time, I had access to some resources as a student, and so it was kind of meant to be a short-term thing, but it really grew and it really exploded because of the major interest in Pan-Africanism and anti-imperialist politics that was emerging across the whole region at the time. So this is kind of the short version. The All African People's Revolutionary Party did a lot to educate me politically and to understanding Pan-Africanism and understanding the need for, this kind of work. But yeah, that's long story short, I really do want to highlight the role that Burkinabe who were born and raised in Ouagadougou and other parts of the country played. So, specifically, I mentioned Wenla Sida Fabrice Sampore. I have another comrade, Osian Sawadogo. They were there from the beginning, and we really started the center together.
So I said that the Thomas Sankara Center for African Liberation and Unity, it's a Pan-African library, it's a think tank, it's a political education center. We understand those terms, but explain in a little more detail, how does it function? Where does it operate? What do you actually do?
Okay, that's also another great question. One of the things that we always talk about around here at the Thomas Sankara Center is the fact that, the struggle to liberate Africa is an intergenerational struggle. It didn't start with us. And so we named the center after Thomas Sankara, who is Burkina Faso's foremost revolutionary figure in history. He's the one that basically created the country of Burkina Faso, because before it was called Upper Volta. And he's an important anti-imperialist, socialist, revolutionary figure for the entire continent. One of the things we always say is that, I can't call him on the phone and ask him questions about how we're going to liberate Africa. I can't, write a letter to Frantz Fanon and expect him to respond. I can't write a text message to Kwame Nkrumah and wait for him to read it. But we can consult the works that they left behind, study them, so every generation doesn't have to start from square one. We don't have to repeat the same mistakes. We can learn and study in terms of what was done in the past, so that every generation can take things a step further and not just be stuck in this cycle. And this is something that all the great Pan-Africanists talked about. So Thomas Sankara has this quote that we love, where he said that a soldier without political and ideological education is a potential criminal. We understand it's not just the soldiers, but that's a major aspect too. But the entire society needs this political education. Amilcar Cabral, who was another great Pan-Africanist from Guinea-Bissau, who fought to liberate his country, and Cape Verde as well, from Portuguese colonialism, explained that there's no such thing as a successful revolution without a revolutionary theory. So we understand that, historically, all of the revolutionaries, all of the anti-imperialists, all the people who fought for change, they had to have a certain base, an understanding of history, an understanding of economics, from a working class perspective, or from the perspective of the people. They had to have some sort of understanding of philosophy. So these are the things that we teach. We have a weekly work study circle. We are currently we have 3 circles in 2 locations. So we have 2 groups that meet in Ouagadougou, and now we have one that meets in Niger. So I'm currently in Niger. I live in Burkina Faso, but I've been in Niger for about a month and a half now, because we're getting the center started here. We have a Young Pioneer program that was modeled after the one that existed under Thomas Sankara between 1985 and 87. So we have a member who I mentioned earlier, Osian Sawadogo. He was part of the Young Pioneers under Sankara. So as a child, he was receiving political education during that first revolution in Burkina Faso. And so we're working with children ages 8 to 14 to learn from that, re-implement it, teach it to the young people, primary and secondary schoolers, as we say here. In the US, you would say like elementary and middle school. We have regular film screenings. So we're showing people films that are talking about Congo, that are talking about Palestine, that are talking about Haiti, Sudan, so, anything to broaden our understanding of the world. Let us know who our allies are. Let us know, which enemies we're fighting in the same places, how that works. It's a geopolitical question. So we're doing that sort of geopolitical education largely through films, but that's also part of our weekly study circles. So these are like the base of what we do day to day. Oh, and we have a library. So that's something that that's open 6 days of the week in Ouagadougou and now Niamey. So people can come throughout the week and check out books. And, these are books that are not available outside of the Thomas Sankara Center for the most part, whether in Burkina Faso or Niger. So people can now come and read directly the speeches of Thomas Sankara, can read the books of Kwame Nkrumah, can read, all sorts of things. We have, Cheikh Anta Diop, who's super popular here. We have even Fidel Castro. We have Ho Chi Minh. We have Ahmed Sékou Touré. all these kinds of books that are talking about these anti-imperialist and Pan-African in revolutionary themes.
So again, Mel W. asked at the top, what are some of the good books to learn about this topic? What would be the top 3 or top 5 that you would that you can pull off the top of your head to answer Mel's question?
This is a good question. I keep saying it, but these questions are excellent, and it's a hard one too because there's so many. I think the question was about understanding geopolitics in Africa. If you're gonna understand how Africa is in the position that it's in right now, you got to start with a book like How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. We just finished reading that collectively in Burkina Faso this year. If you want to understand Burkina Faso specifically, Thomas Sankara, again, his primary source material, his speeches. So Thomas Sankara speaks. That's going to give you an understanding of what Burkina Faso is as a country and how it ended up, in the position it's in right now, where it has these sort of revolutionary values at the center of it. Oh gosh, there's so many. To understand what our objective is, where we're heading towards, I would recommend Africa Must Unite by Kwame Nkrumah. I also got to recommend, so we talked about Southern Africa earlier. Dr. Gerald Horne has a lot of great books that talk about Southern Africa. So if the question was about that in particular, definitely check out Dr. Gerald Horne's work. And he talks specifically about U.S. intervention in Southern Africa. Let me give you one last one. Oh, there's a lot. Well, let's see. We're currently reading a speech collection by Amilcar Cabral in one of the study circles. The one we're reading is it's in French, but the speeches are similar to stuff that's out in English. So I think the closest one to the English version would be Return to the Source. Okay. So Return to the Source by Amilcar Cabral. That's another good one.
And I stepped away because as you were mentioning these topics, I was trying to find the books on my bookcase, but they're in another bookcase in another room. So I was going to hold them up as you were mentioning them. And this is, some might roll their eyes, but if someone is asking the question that Mel asked, I always say miseducation of the Negro, because particularly if someone in the West is asking me that question, because the premises that are laid out in that book, to me, help one understand how to deal with so much of the misinformation and disinformation that they have been indoctrinated by. And then your mind is more open to receiving new information. So I always, even though Carter G. Woodson isn't talking about what's going on the continent, that to me is always the place when someone says, where do I start? To me, that's where I start them, and then take them in the direction that you just did.
That's a good point. Can I add one more?
Please.
I want to add also Stokely Speaks, From Black Power to Pan-Africanism by Kwame Traore, because I don't think I'd be here on the continent right now if I hadn't read that book. I think that book is very transformative in terms of understanding that connection between the diaspora and the continent. That book really changed my life, and it's an easy read, so I really highly recommend it.
There's another one that I, again, not dealing so much with the continent, but Fred Hampton Speaks, which is a collection of, I think, 3 or 4 speeches of his that help people understand the revolutionary aspect of the mindset. That's also about a $6 or $7 book. So Fred Hampton Speaks is to me another very good reference for people to use. So there's a lot of comparison about folks are really now paying a lot of attention to Burkina Faso's president Ibrahim Traore, but they don't really know the history of Thomas Sankara. So let's start the conversation there, so that people can really have, I think, a much better understanding. To me, you don't know where you are if you don't know where you come from. So in your mind, first of all, you live in Burkina Faso, you're on the ground, you're experiencing this dynamic every day. And I hope you don't laugh and think this is a silly question. Is that a fair comparison for people to draw?
Yeah, I think it is a fair comparison. I think that we're at a point where Ibrahim Traore has earned this comparison. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the two men are the same, but I definitely believe that Ibrahim Traore is walking on the path that Thomas Sankara laid. And he himself is very clear that, his goal is to be Sankarist, as people say in Burkina Faso. Like he wants to put Burkina Faso back on that trajectory that Thomas Sankara started the country on. And I really think that he is putting the country back on that pathway. I mean, one of the best examples of that is Thomas Sankara really, really put an emphasis on food sovereignty, on local production. He has a quote that's produce what we consume what we produce. That is exactly what Ibrahim Traore is all about. Food sovereignty is a major aspect of this, industrialization, these kinds of things that are breaking from the imperialist system, the neo-colonial system. And I genuinely believe that Ibrahim Traore is studying Thomas Sankara, learning from the Sankarists who have been there since the 80s. The first prime minister that Ibrahim Traore chose was actually somebody who was close to Thomas Sankara to a certain extent, and who organized something called the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, the CDRs, to defend the Thomas Sankara revolution back in the 80s. So that was the first PM that Ibrahim Traore put into power. He's not the PM right now, but it's not for any reason that's antagonistic. He's actually still involved in the government and very, very happy to represent Burkina Faso as an ambassador right now. But yeah, that was one of the first indications. Ibrahim Traore immediately surrounded himself with the people who were close to Thomas Sankara during that era. So absolutely, I think it is a fair comparison. The two were both very young when they came to power. Ibrahim Traore was 35, and then Sankara was also in his mid-30s. I want to say 36, but I might be getting that wrong. But both came to power in their mid-30s, and in the very similar ways. They were both, military men who came to power via coups. We have to be careful around this, revolutionary coups, because not all coups are the same. There are coups that are reactionary, and unfortunately most coups in Africa have been, but there have been coups that are revolutionary. Thomas Sankara being one great example, and Ibrahim Traore being another really great example. And so there's a very, very similar history that unites them as well.
Carol Asbersam, thank you very much for that super sticker. And folks, you need to listen to Carol, because Carol is obviously brilliant. Folks, donate and hit the like button. Y'all need to listen to Carol, because Carol knows what she's talking about. So what do you make now of all the attention that's being focused on Burkina Faso with the, I'll call it a liberation coup, and the impact that it's having on other countries in the region, which I believe is one of the real fears that the West has, is that this mindset is spreading, and this revolutionary mindset is spreading and spreading quickly?
I think the international solidarity is super important. A lot of it has been caused, most recently, there's been an outpouring of support for President Ibrahim Traore and for Burkina Faso as a country in the aftermath of the AFRICOM chief. AFRICOM is U.S. Africa Command, the U.S.'s military unit operating in Africa. The chief of AFRICOM is somebody named General Michael Langley. He made a statement basically accusing President Ibrahim Traore of funneling money and basically lining his own pockets through trade with China and, revolving around Burkina Faso's gold mines. And Burkina Faso immediately pushed back. The Minister of Foreign Affairs in Burkina Faso wrote a declaration saying that, this this is a terrible accusation. And then the international response and a local one was immediate in terms of just mobilizations. It's the first time I've seen, protests of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands. I don't have the numbers, but of people pouring out into the streets in London. I saw protests in New York. I saw protests in France. And then, I was in Niger at the time, but my comrades who are in Burkina and part of the Thomas Sankara Center took to the streets in Ouagadougou to protest and to show their support of Ibrahim Traore. And so to see this, it's so important because we know that, when these figures like a Langley of AFRICOM speak this way, what they're trying to do is manufacture consent to eventually come and have enough people turn against Burkina Faso that they can justify some sort of intervention. There's a lot of terrible, awful fake news, that I would say fake news about Burkina Faso right now that the people of Burkina Faso, the governments of Burkina Faso have denounced. I mean, it's just been terrible to see, like, as somebody who lives in Burkina Faso, it's shocking actually to see the way certain institutions are accusing Burkina Faso of committing human rights violations, massacring civilians, saying that, there's ethnic warfare or tension. And it's like, I live there and I'm like, where is this happening? It's like two different, it's like night and day, the way some of the reporting is done and then what's actually happening for real in the country in terms of the mass support and mobilizations that exist for the government. So be very wary in terms of the way certain outlets are trying to depict Burkina Faso, claiming that it's not democratic. I think it's one of the most democratic states on earth right now, claiming that, there's human rights violations. Somebody said propaganda, terrible propaganda against the country. So please, continue to push back, continue to, the world needs to continue to show its support. And I'll just add, remember, Burkina Faso is not alone. Burkina Faso is in an alliance with these two other countries, Mali and Niger. And the three countries are protecting one another. So Abdourahmane Chani, president of Niger, and Assimi Goïta, president of Mali, also need this kind of support and protection because as a bloc, they're basically keeping the entire alliance of Sahel states, these three countries, safe. So if any single one of these states is targeted, or God forbid, any one of the states is overthrown, it's going to have a terrible impact. The entire, goal of the Alliance of Sahel states is going to just be in jeopardy. So let us make noise for Burkina. Let us not forget to make noise for Mali and Niger. Let us protect this region of Africa that is at the forefront of resisting imperialism, taking back control over its natural resources, changing the lives of the people that live in these countries. So I really, really do encourage that continual mobilization, continuing to educate people about what's really going on.
Last time you and I spoke, you were telling me about these citizens. I'll use this term very liberally because I don't have a better term. Citizens militias that come out at night and they go to large intersections, and they're basically community watch groups. Better than that's the word. Community watch groups, and they take a lot of personal responsibility in maintaining order at night in fear of outside attack or internal external sponsored threat internally.
Absolutely, yes. These groups still exist. They're a powerful network within Burkina Faso that spans the entire country. In French, it's called La Veille Citoyenne. I would translate that to like the Citizens Night Watch, because they come out at the nighttime, maybe around like 9 p.m. Up until maybe 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning. And there's a local word for it as well, Waia. Waia means like come and go out. It was a rallying cry, a mobilization cry, like Waia, go out, to defend, to mobilize. And it became their name. And they currently exist in every single roundabout in Ouagadougou, the capital, every single roundabout in Bobo Dioulasso, which is the second largest city. And then I was told by one of the leaders, 2,000 cities and villages across the country. And, I've seen them across the country when, I've traveled to different parts of the state, and they really do come out, and they really are everywhere pretty much. Yeah, they're everywhere. And it's very impressive. They are actually many different organizations, but they come together under like the same network. So they have like it's like a network of organizations that's tied together, or like a coalition of many different groups that are doing this work. And they are inspired by, as I mentioned, the committees for the defense of the revolution that existed during the Thomas Sankara era. So Thomas Sankara, instituted these this network of like civilian participation within the revolution that exercised various campaigns during the 80s, and also served as the eyes and ears of the revolution. There's a history behind this that's tied to that Sankara era, which is also tied to Cuba, because Cuba has something called Committees for the Defense of the Revolution. But there's like this whole lineage, and so it's very important. And I think this is the number one thing that protects Burkina Faso. I think it's very hard for right now, the US government, the French government, the European Union, and others that are trying to and would like to overthrow Burkina Faso. It's really hard for them to do this right now because the popular support is just so crystal clear. It's so widespread, it's so transparent, because the civilians come out, and they do this on their own initiative, their own accord. They've decided that that's what they want to do, and it makes it very, very hard. The pushback against Langley was enormous, and it's because the people of Burkina Faso have made it clear where they stand.
You've told us a little bit about who Thomas Sankara was. What happened to him?
Yeah, Thomas Sankara is really the founding father of Burkina Faso, even though, the country got its independence, its flag independence from France about 20 years prior to him. Upper Volta, which is what the country was called up until Sankara's time, is very different from Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is a country that is founded upon revolutionary values. The term Burkina Faso means the country of upright people, or the country of people of integrity. So every single time somebody calls themselves Burkinabe, which is what the people of Burkina Faso are called, they're actually declaring a certain set of revolutionary principles and values. It's powerful. There's not a lot of countries in the world where it's like, to even call yourself a citizen of that country is to proclaim a very clear value that's rooted in a certain revolutionary history. But Thomas Sankara was only in power for 4 years before he was overthrown. He was killed by his right-hand man, Blaise Compaoré, a traitor to the revolution, somebody who's still alive. He's somewhere between Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, or somewhere in the Gulf states. So he, as far as I understand, he officially lives in Ivory Coast or Côte d'Ivoire, but he was receiving some sort of medical treatment in, I believe, Saudi Arabia. If not Saudi Arabia, somewhere in that Gulf region. He was getting some sort of like medical procedure done. He's still alive. He's never really been punished for the crimes he committed. At one point, a former president of Burkina Faso, who was a traitor to the people, had like a swift trial for him and immediately pardoned him. This is something that people had no say in. He was just, he was issued an immediate pardon. I want to also say, though, as much as Blaise Compaoré is a terrible man, a traitor to us all, somebody who is in the pockets of the neo-colonialists, I think sometimes he gets blamed too much. And the reason why I say this is because I think sometimes when we put all the focus on him, we downplay the fact that this wasn't just him acting alone. This was an international conspiracy that the CIA and French intelligence service, French intelligence agents and services have not properly been held accountable for. We may not be able to hold them accountable until Africa's free, because, unfortunately, we have all this evidence about the CIA's role in killing Lumumba, overthrowing Nkrumah, and we can't really do anything about it as Africa is not free to really impose anything. But, we really, really have to keep in mind that Compaoré was not acting alone. Compaoré was part of an international effort to get rid of Thomas Sankara that these imperialists were orchestrating, that he was connected to. And there's still a fight there. The CIA owes us the declassification of certain information. French President Emmanuel Macron told us years ago and lied, saying that France would declassify the documents that they have regarding Sankara's assassination. They've never done it. We know that they do have these documents. So there's still a struggle in terms of understanding the extent and the role in which they played. But this is important as we're protecting Ibrahim Traore, and the entire alliance of Sahel states, Assimi Goïta and Abdourahmane Chani as well. We need to understand the role of these international imperialist bodies, the CIA, French intelligence, MI6, and also, there's a lot to talk about in terms of, honestly, US AID. There's a lot to talk about in terms of even if it's not currently operational, we do have to look at USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, in more recent years, and even in these past few years, in terms of what's been going on in the Sahel.
And I just want to point out, because you mentioned Compaoré and his being the tip of the spear for the international elements, again, mainly the CIA and French intelligence, USAID, that were responsible for overthrowing Thomas Sankara, similar to what happened to Patrice Lumumba with, I think it was Tshombe taking over from Patrice Lumumba, and he was the operative of the Belgians and the CIA. So that's why I was asking the question about what happened to Thomas Sankara, because people need to understand the history and just the whole diabolical nature of the West, because that then, I think, gives people great light and insight into the risks, the challenges, and the threats that are facing the president in Burkina Faso today. Inem.
Yes, exactly. We have to learn from this history. We have to understand, the way this imperialist system is operating. I'll just say something that's very important for people to understand, specifically about this in the Sahel right now, bringing things closer to the president in terms of how some of these institutions have been working to destabilize this region. There's also the question of NGOs, the question of USAID, as I mentioned. Here's what I'll say. In 2022, Mali became the first African country to go before the United Nations and say that the French military, which has been allegedly working with us to fight terrorism, has actually been arming and providing intelligence to the terrorist organizations that they claim to be fighting. I'm not just the one saying this. This is what the Malian government said to the United Nations at that level. Since that time, the Alliance of Sahel States countries have been very clear that a lot of these governments that have claimed to fight terrorism have actually supported the terrorist attacks that are occurring in this region. One of the more shocking revelations this year was around USAID, when certain congressmen, there was serious accusations that USAID was funneling money to certain groups, such as, for example, Boko Haram, and others that were cited in terms of they're getting their hands on this funding. Like I said, you don't have to take my word for it. Look into what these congressmen have said, and the accusations that they've made. This is why there's been a crack.
Let me jump in just for a minute and make a couple points and give you a second to get some water, folks. Go back and listen to the testimony that General Michael Langley gave, the Senate testimony that he gave, and I've talked about this before, but I think going back and looking at this now speaks volumes. And Langley was calling for the arrest of President Traore and saying that he's misusing the resources in the country for his own benefit. And then you had Senator Wicker, I think the head of the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Wicker says that he's just confused and befuddled about why African countries have not been able to take better advantage of the resources in their own country. He's ignoring the history of the overthrow of Thomas Sankara. He's ignoring the history of the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba. He is ignoring the history and the U.S. involvement in so many coups, in so many elements of regime change, that it would be laughable if it weren't so horrific in terms of, and then you've got Emmanuel Macron echoing the very same ridiculous chatter. I don't understand why these African nations cannot do better in taking. Well, because you keep overthrowing them, you keep murdering their leaders. Go ahead, Inem. Wait a minute. Peggy Parks Miller, thank you for that $10 super sticker, and Kevin Baptiste, thank you. Go ahead.
Right. Yes, I'm so tired of this rhetoric. I mean, it's unfortunately so common. There's this like constant rhetoric of, Africa is so backwards, it's so behind. And there's also there's another one that's come out recently. It's been this idea where it's like, you have to stop denouncing imperialism, blaming colonialism. We have to start, Africans need to take responsibility. What about their agency, their role? Stop playing the victim, this and that. And, that would make sense if the West wasn't constantly overthrowing revolutionary leaders. If it was just simply something where, people were voting in these neo-colonial puppets and there was no, constant sabotage of revolutionary actors, then I would say that, yeah, the fault lies on the side of, Africans who are just don't have, their stuff together. But it's like every single time there's a revolutionary, there's a major effort to overthrow him, to destabilize the country. There's rigged elections, there's coups, there's assassinations, there's all sorts of these sorts of interventions, and there's a lot of hypocrisy. Also, there's so much hypocrisy. Just to give you an example, the Alliance of Sahel states, they're always talking about how these coups in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger aren't democratic. Military rule, this is wrong. Where were the elections? This and that. Even though that the people of the three countries have poured out into the streets in favor of this. But there's no outcry for other countries that are actually clearly not democratic. For example, there was a coup in Gabon. That coup leader has actually made a lot of business deals with France. Even this year, he signed a new business deal with France. There's no outrage. France has not come out to denounce the leader of Gabon. Everything is fine, even though he came to power the same way. We see this crying about democracy, but there's countries in Africa like Cameroon that have had Western-backed leaders stay in power through very clearly rigged elections for several decades. What is it, like 40 plus years or something, where Paul Biya, president of Cameroon, has been there serving the West. Where is the outrage, the outcry about the lack of democracy? There's countries like Swaziland where, the country is ruled by an absolute monarchy, and there's like resistance and all this effort, and the African Union has not come out to say that they're suspended. But Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are suspended because there's no democracy. And so it's very selective, the way this selective outrage targeting just three countries. It's not about democracy. It's about the fact that these countries are not in line with the neo-colonial world order. These countries are resisting the status quo to put the needs of their people first. It's something that is shocking for these Western countries, for their the puppet rulers that they've been collaborating with. This is totally against the system and the world order that's been in place for a long time right now. And so that's why these countries are being targeted. And there's going to be a lot of effort to get rid of the three of them. A lot. There are currently sanctions, US sanctions on Mali. There are European Union sanctions on Mali and Niger. And then Ibrahim Traore has now survived several destabilization or, assassination or coup attempts against him. These countries have a target on their back. Please be attentive to the way the media is depicting the three of them, and compare that to how they talk about other countries where there's actually an outcry on the level of the people in terms of, the lack of progress, like Cameroon, as I mentioned.
Monroe Abram, thank you for that $20 super sticker. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. And Inem, one of the one of the elements of evidence to the whole thing that you were just discussing, that again, it would be humorous if it weren't so pathetic. If you go back to 2021, Mamadi Doumbouya in Guinea met with the U.S. ambassador in Guinea the day before he initiated the coup to overthrow Alpha Condé. And Mamadi Doumbouya had been trained by AFRICOM. He had been trained by AFRICOM. He goes to meet with the U.S. ambassador, I think it was on a Sunday, and then Monday, we have a coup overthrowing Condé. And that's just further evidence of the complicity of the West and the hypocrisy of people like Senator Wicker and Emmanuel Macron, who scratched their head saying, we can't figure out why these countries can't better manage their resources.
Yeah, again, yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Not all coups are the same. So you have to understand a lot of these coups are Western backed, which is, I think, why there's some people who are just having a hard time also accepting that, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have revolutionary governments, because, some people have lived in countries that have had these reactionary Western backed coups, and they're scared and they're like, this is what we know. And I think it's important to point out a lot of the coups have been Western backed. These three, the reason why the U.S. and other countries like France don't support them is because they aren't. They were shocking to these Western governments. I mean, look at how quickly Niger's coup was. There are invasion threats, in the region immediately. There's all these calls to overthrow the coup, intervene militarily. We can judge a lot about the governments of these countries based off of how imperialists react to them. And, there's a lot of hypocrisy. We know for a fact that the West has orchestrated many coups. We have declassified CIA documents that talk about this, going back to the Nkrumah and Lumumba era, but also closer to the present as well. And so we really do have to make a distinction. Somebody said these are revolutionary, it's not coups. And I think that's fair. I think that some coups are revolutionary. And so I don't think all coups are the same. We really have to make a difference. We have to understand some are Western backed. These are reactionary. And then we have the Sankara types. And we're seeing the Sankara types in the AES. But yeah, the West is always intervening in African politics. And there's just so much hypocrisy. And, there's a lot of talk right now. To give you another example of Togo, the Togolese president has just come up with a new title for himself. He's now going to be the minister of, the minister of, the president of the Council of Ministers. And basically what that means is he's going to be in executive power for the rest of his life. There's no term limit to his new title. And to give you context to what's going on here, a French billionaire named Vincent Bolloré was actually charged with fraudulent elections that put him into, that rigged these elections that have prolonged his position in power. So we have, even in recent years, evidence of, Western billionaires funding corruption, supporting corrupt and rigged elections in this region. But the focus is, of course, going to be on the alliance of Sahel states that are resisting imperialism.
Vincent Robinson, thank you very much for that very generous $20 super sticker. And he says, thank you for the weekday education. Keep it coming. Well, it's because I have phenomenal guests like Inem that make this what it is. One of the other things that I've tried to point out as we have been focusing on Burkina Faso, how long was Upper Volta a colony, a French colony? 150 years? How long was it colonized by the French?
That's a great question. So the region was invaded by the French in the late 19th century, the mid to late 19th century, okay, and stayed a colony until 1960. Okay. So what is that, like? I'm trying to think off the top. Maybe I'll say, like, give or take, maybe 100 years. Okay. And then prior to that, this region was also impacted by the slave trade, the European slave trade that preceded it.
Here's why I asked that question. Okay, for simple math, we'll say that it was a colony for 100 years and has been considered by most estimates to be one of, if not one of the poorest countries on the planet. And it's running neck and neck with Yemen in terms of how poor it is. Ibrahim Traore, and please help me with the pronunciation of his last name, has been in power 18 months. And in that period of time, he's implementing programs to improve rice production so that indigenous people in Burkina Faso will prefer to consume domestic grown rice as opposed to foreign imported rice, improving the health care of women, improving the education standards in the country, bringing in nuclear power so that not only can he provide a power grid to his own country, but he can start selling electricity to countries outside of Burkina Faso, and launching satellites in concert with Russia so that he can do aerial photography. He can use that satellite imagery to provide cellular telephone coverage so that he can have a better understanding of the topography of the country, so he'll be better able to manage agriculture in the country. And folks have to understand the infrastructure that is necessary in able not only to launch satellites, but to use that imagery. All in about 18 months after 100 years of colonialism. Folks need to understand that's what I call progress in a very short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been incredible. I have lived in Burkina Faso throughout this entire time. So I was there just, a bit before Ibrahim Traore came to power, and I've gotten to see the country, throughout his time as the president of Burkina Faso. And the change is incredible. I mean, like you said, Burkina Faso is a country that was extremely underdeveloped. And I want to give context to that, what I mean when I say that. And I mean that in the sense that Walter Rodney talked about it, in the sense that it was super exploited. This is a region of the world that has gold. It's a region of the world that has uranium, next door. It has all these sorts of resources and minerals. And historically, the Sahel was actually probably the richest part of Africa. This Sahel region of Africa historically was home to some of the most wealthy, advanced, kingdoms prior to European intervention. So if you've heard of, Mansa Musa, the Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, Sanghoy, Kanem-Borno, all this was in this Sahel region. It was very prosperous, and it was also a major center of learning, of scholarship, education worldwide. People would come to study in this region and to understand things like astronomy, philosophy, etc. And so we have to understand this was a region of the world prior to European intervention that was very advanced. This is also a region that has become, like you said, really one of the world's centers of poverty. And it's hard. I know a lot of people don't like to hear it framed that way, but the truth is, it was something. The poverty in this region is something that was done to the Sahel. It didn't just happen. It was something that was done to these countries. They were underdeveloped because they were exploited. The people were forced to work and to labor and to produce basically like peanuts. And that's not even an exaggeration, to literally stop growing food that would feed themselves and their families, and to grow like literal peanuts to export to the West to help develop Western economies. The region was plundered for its resources, but everything was manufactured and refined outside of these countries. And this happened, like you mentioned, 100 years of colonialism. Okay, we have to add to that also, 60 years of neo-colonialism, with the exception of 4 years of Thomas Sankara. Outside of that, 50, 60 years of neo-colonialism. And then, prior to that, like I mentioned, there was a history of slavery, which had a huge impact on depopulating this area and reversing sort of the entire indigenous economic dynamics that were in place, that were designed to facilitate growth. And we're now, again, orienting the economy towards export to the West. All of these things have done terrible damage to this region. And in a short period of time, we're seeing a government that is reversing this and creating an economy that is really helping the majority of the people. Most people in Burkina Faso are farmers. That's the majority of the population. There's a video, I have to find it, of somebody, he's speaking a local language called More, but he's a farmer and he's like crying tears of joy that, because of the government of Ibrahim Traore, he's had the best yield that he's had of his lifetime, because the government has supplied him with farming equipment for free of charge and totally just transformed his livelihood. And you have to understand, like, these are the people who are being helped by Ibrahim Traore first and foremost. These are regular people who have been, historically, for a long time, just using like a little farming hoe to, cultivate the ground, and who are now receiving tractors, who are now receiving advanced equipment, who are absolutely transforming their ability to produce for the country. And we're cutting back on imports from other parts of the world in terms of what our sort of staple products are, like rice, as you mentioned. These are huge phenomenal achievements. Industrialization, there's many factories, a lot of them also geared towards food sovereignty as well, that are being developed. And in a collective way, there's a popular investment program so that citizens of Burkina Faso can all have stakes in these state-owned enterprises and benefit from it, contribute to it, and receive, the profit that's being made, and have that, impact the collective. It's a wonderful thing. There's a lot of transformation.
He's also started, when you talked about factories, because one of the agricultural exports of Burkina Faso is cotton, and so now they're processing their own raw cotton and turning that raw cotton into the textile of fabric, instead of exporting the raw cotton and allowing other countries to process it and make the real money on the open market.
Yeah, this is another legacy of Thomas Sankara, actually. Thomas Sankara was a huge promoter of something called the Faso d'Anfani. I'm actually wearing it. So this is locally produced Burkinabe cotton called the Faso d'Anfani, and it's a symbol of the revolution. This is considered, when people wear this, they think of the Thomas Sankara era, because he put such an emphasis on using the local cotton to produce indigenous clothing, and it's very popular. And Ibrahim Traore is doing the same thing. He's promoting the use of our locally grown cotton to create fabrics, textiles like this, the Faso d'Anfani, so people don't have to rely on, the way if anybody's been to Africa, especially at least West Africa, because I know the context. I'm sure you've been to like the markets and you've seen just like all this flooding of like secondhand clothes from, the US and Europe or China, I don't know where, Asia, other places. Lots of like, what do you call them? Like bootleg stuff, Gucci, but it's spelled wrong. All this, all over Africa. We don't need to have that anymore. We need to be growing and producing our own textiles, our own fabrics, and that's what Traore is about, and that's what makes this possible.
Carol Asperam, thank you for again very generous $20 soup sticker. And again, Carol is really, really on top of her game, folks. This is one of the best programs yet. Props to Dr. Leon and his guests. Carol, thank you very much. I think Burkina is the 5th largest gold producing country on the continent. And that's another element that he is now, President Traore is not only mining, but he has nationalized the mines and is refining the gold in country.
Yes, there have been a number of mines that have been nationalized in Burkina Faso. More recently, there were 2 that were involved in a dispute. I hope I'm not getting it wrong. I think there were Canadian mining companies. A lot of the mining companies are Canadian, but some of them are also Australian or from the UK. So I might be getting the place wrong, but it was one of those 3 countries. In any case, there were 2 mines that were involved in a dispute. And, but Traore was just like, you know what, we'll take it over. It's good. You're good. The dispute is over. We'll take this out of your hands. And he nationalized them. And he made a statement shortly thereafter saying that, we plan to revoke more mining licenses from international or foreign mining companies. So basically just brace yourself. We're coming for more of the mines. This is something that Niger has also been doing with the uranium deposits. So Niger has gotten rid of the French mining company Orano, nationalizing its uranium mines, and Mali is battling 3 different foreign mining companies. Barrick Gold is one of them, Anglo American is the other, and the other one is, I always forget the name of the other one. It'll come to me. But anyways, they're battling these mines to get control over their resources. And Burkina Faso has 2 projects. One of them is a gold refinery. The other is a mining waste refinery. And the mining waste refinery, as of this year, just produced its first gold bar. So basically showing that, maybe scraps of certain materials that could have been discarded or like previously maybe were just considered waste. Actually, no, we can, my power is out. These bars, these gold bars, this mining waste can become, this finished product. You can see this is a reality, but the nuclear power plants will be transforming this reality.
Do you need to go, or can you give me a couple more minutes?
I don't know. I can give you a couple more minutes.
Okay,
this is just
okay.
part of being
out
here.
My life today. Thank you for that $10 super sticker. Peace and joy. My life totally. There we go. My life totally. So really quickly, when we look at footage of protests in Burkina Faso in support of the government, we see the Burkina flag and a lot of Russian flags being waved, which is a huge concern to the West. On the ground, what do you see as being the involvement of Russia, not only in Burkina Faso, but in terms of supporting the alliance of Sahel states? You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Russia is an ally of the alliance of Sahel states, and I know some people in the United States or other Western countries might feel uncomfortable about that fact, but it is an alliance. It's a strategic one, and Russia is they're helping the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States countries, in a number of ways. So when we talk about the nuclear power plants and some of these refineries that are being built, not just in Burkina but across the 3 countries, it's because of that that alliance that exists. And that doesn't mean that Russia has nothing to gain, or that, sometimes people are like, well, Russia wants it's serving its own interests. Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of how things work geopolitically. Countries collaborate, they trade. That's not, to me, the issue. I think the real issue is when countries make unfair trade deals, and if you don't accept them, then they come in and reverse your government, which is what the West does. It'd be one thing if the West had terrible trade deals and then African leaders had the right to refuse those deals, and then the West is like, I'm sorry, I'll leave. But the problem is with the West compared to Russia is when the deals suck, if you don't accept them, you just might get assassinated. I mean, historically, it's what we see. So I think that Russia is a fair partner to the Alliance of Sahel States. Of course, the AES is going to unify and develop independently. It's not about having anybody telling the AES what to do. It's about, working together in a way that makes sense, especially at this point in time. And Ibrahim Traore is actually in Russia right now. He's currently there. He's meeting with Vladimir Putin as we speak. Yeah, I think it just makes sense. I think it's a good partnership. And it's just to give other aspect. It's the industrialization that I mentioned, these power plants and refineries, but also defense. There's a lot of need for defense. As I've mentioned, the AES countries and citizens have accused the terrorist organizations of being Western backed. That's just a fact. That's what they've said. And so they are turning towards Russia to really get out of this this terrible situation with some of these death squads. I mean, think of like the Contras that attacked Nicaragua in the 80s. You know, Nicaragua was this was and is this revolutionary country, but it was targeted, and that's what we're experiencing in the Sahel. We are part of this liberated zone, but we're being attacked directly with these violent paramilitaries. And we need help. There is a need for help. People are actually dying because of this. And if Russia is going to be the partner to help us to secure these countries, then absolutely, let it be Russia then.
Mel W., thank you again. This is I think your second contribution today. And he agrees with Carol, which shows you how smart Mel is, because Carol is brilliant. This is great. Thank you. You're a new member. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate that. Is it two things, and then I'll let you sit in the dark. Two things. One, for President Traore, in the midst of all the chaos around him, to feel comfortable enough to leave his country and go to Russia says to me that there is a level of stability and comfort in his mind. And is it too simplistic for me to put this whole thing in the context of imperialism versus anti-imperialism as it relates to the West and Russia involvement on the continent? Imperialism versus anti-imperialism.
To answer your first question, yeah, I think it does say a lot about the stability of Burkina Faso, despite what we hear in terms of the fact that Traore does feel comfortable enough to step out and to go to Russia at this time and to have like an international visit. Honestly, when you're in Burkina Faso, even as the government does come forward and reveal certain destabilization attempts like they did last month, there is still really a feeling of stability in the sense that it's like everywhere you go, it's very clear that the people are for Ibrahim Traore. There's not a lot of divisiveness among the population like you'd be led to believe if you paid attention just to like what foreign media outlets are reporting. You'd think that there's like this huge split or something. Not really. Overwhelmingly, I'll just say, despite how much I know that the West is targeting the Alliance of Sahel states and Burkina Faso, I'm not really super fearful that Traore is going to be, quickly overthrown. I do really feel like there is too much support for them to reverse him right now. I think that it would just be not strategic. It's going to take years of them trying to get to a point, and we'll fight against it. But in the near future, no, I feel like it is solid, to be honest. I feel like there's just so much support for him on the ground. And yeah, I think it is a question of imperialism versus anti-imperialism. Some of my favorite photos that came out this past couple, yesterday or the day before, of Ibrahim Traore in Russia were with him and President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. They're just like so smiley and so happy to meet up and to talk. And we see that the world exists in different blocks, whether we like it or not. There are people who, and not just people, but states that are on the side of imperialism and that have benefited from imperialism, aka the imperialist states, but also their allies and their proxies. And there are states that are resisting imperialism in this world right now. I believe in the total liberation and unification of Africa, one unified socialist Africa like Kwame Nkrumah talked about. But if we're going to get there, we have to be in the anti-imperialist camp. We have to work with all of the states that are resisting, NATO imperialism. And it's the contradiction of our times. Either we're going to succeed in our mission or we're just going to be set back as humans. And I look at what's going on on the world level right now. I look at how things have gotten crazy really on an international level in terms of how concentrated wealth and power are, the haves and the have-nots. And we really do. It's really a countdown. Like, we have to be on the side of the countries that are resisting. The propaganda machine against them is so strong. It's so strong. I mean, even just to say countries like Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Eritrea, to talk about these countries, North Korea, it's so taboo. It's like, people think that you're talking about, I don't know, some sort of terrible crimes against humanity. It's unfortunate, but it's like, we have to look at the reality for what it is, which is that there are states that have, for a long time, developed themselves through plunder and exploitation. And then there are states that are really, the victims of colonialism and just refuse to submit to that exploitation. And we just have to be on the side of them, and they have to come together. I believe, and this is the last thing I'll say because I'm talking a lot, but I really believe that, 2025, we're 21st century, we need to have a new tricontinental. If you don't know the history, there was a tricontinental movement in the 60s, 1960s, that was, centered a lot around Cuba as sort of the main orchestrator of this tricontinental movement that brought together Africa, Asia, and Latin America to resist imperialism. Well, we have the Alliance of Sahel states right now. We have ALBA, which is the Bolivarian Alliance in the Americas, led by Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and other states. And we have an axis of resistance that also exists. It's largely centered around Palestine, but led by Iran. Like, these forces of resistance also need to really come together. I think it's time for a tricontinental of the 21st century. We need to formalize some sort of alliance between these states, because I really believe it's about whether or not humanity is going to make it or not.
And this is the final question, and you've basically answered it, but do you believe the rise of Burkina Faso's president could serve as a catalyst for a broader awakening across Africa? And if he were to be targeted, do you think it would ignite a resistance rather than silence?
It has to, first, to answer the first part of the question, it has to awaken something in Africa. And I don't think, and what I mean by that, because I think some people have different ideas about what that looks like. I don't believe that this is going to mean that countries that have neo-colonial rulers, like the rulers are going to go and change their hearts and change their minds. I think what it means to me when I say this will awaken Africa is that the people across the continent are going to fight so hard against neo-colonialism now and do everything in their power to want to join the Alliance of Sahel states, especially as it develops and we see what the industry looks like. They're going to fight so that their countries become a part of this Alliance of Sahel states trajectory. But some people take it to mean that certain leaders will just change their mind. That's not what I think will happen.
Right.
But
no.
But the struggle will intensify, and it must. This has to be the call of people across Africa. It has to be a call that we must join the Alliance of Sahel states. We must reject neo-colonialism. And I really, to answer your second question, I think if Ibrahim Traore is taken down, God forbid, and I'm sitting on a wooden table, so let me knock on wood, I do think it will ignite a lot of resistance, but God forbid, I really don't think that that's what we want to see happen, because, when Lumumba was taken out, there were protests worldwide. But if we look at the way Congo has spiraled, it's just, I wouldn't wish it. I wouldn't wish it on any country. So yes, people will make noise, but let's not let it get there, let's not let it get to a point where it's possible. Let's do everything so he can't get taken out. And let's defend the three countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, because the best defense that they have right now is their alliance, is the fact that they're not going at it alone.
Peggy Parks Miller says, thank you, young lady, for this very informative conversation. Kevin Baptiste says, I'm going to have to encourage the crew to watch this episode. Folks been thirsty for on-the-ground info on this subject. And Rochelle says, to your circumstance, they're sitting in the dark. My power was out for a week in the Chicago suburbs. No biggie. Inemesit Richardson, thank you again. Greatly appreciate you joining me today. And I know you went through a lot to make this happen, because we've been working on this for a minute. So thank you, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. If people are interested in the Thomas Sankara Center and they want to support political education, Pan-African and anti-imperialist education in the Alliance of Sahel States, please check out our Patreon, which is patreon.com/Burkina Books. We're really funding this struggle based off of your support. You know, there's people around the world who are in solidarity with us. So please do check out our Patreon. It's making a lot possible for us. And please check out also our social media, which is largely Instagram. It's Burkina Books on Instagram. Some people are asking for our PayPal. We do have one, but kind of unofficially. Here's what I'll say. You can send to me, and then I will transfer it to our account in Burkina if you're interested. And so maybe if you message us on Instagram, go on to Burkina Books via Instagram and send us a message. I can work out, the PayPal question as well. But the best way to support us right now is on Patreon. And the money goes entirely to supporting revolutionary Pan-African education in Burkina Faso and also now in Niger.
Inem, thank you. Really appreciate it. And look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And the lights will come back on. Thank you, dear.
Yes, and we'll get nuclear power soon. So this, this time, a year, 2 years, who knows? Like this will never be an issue again. So
thank you.
We're working towards it.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, really, folks. The contributions today and that your generosity is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. And as I tell you all always, we're doing this for you, but we can't do this without you. Stay tuned. New episode. In fact, Scott Ritter will be with us Monday. And please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. This is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because it's rhetoric free. See y'all next week again. Scott Ritter will be with us Monday. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Enjoy your weekend. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.